Chapter 6. Cindy hurried to meet Mr. Johnson, still wondering why her stepmother was suddenly so accommodating. Her guest was outside the estate, seeming eager to see the painting. He instantly smiled at her, while Cindy's heart was pounding in her chest. She was excited and nervous at the same time, ready to hear his thoughts of her painting. "Ah, Cinderella, it's really good to see you," he said. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you've created." Cindy didn't want to waste time, so she started walking toward her attic room that was located on the other side of the house. Her stepsisters were still busy with preparations for the ball, but when she glanced over her shoulder, she saw her stepmother peering through the kitchen window. "Yes, let me take you to the painting," she quickly said. "I do have to apologize for the mess. The attic room is where I work." "A true artist is never ashamed of her workplace," he replied. "You have raw talent, my dear." Mr. Johnson was in his mid-50s, and he'd been dealing in art for a long time. He was considered an expert in town, a real collector. Cindy had always been surprised that he'd decided to settle down in Farrington. The town was small, and the closest antique shop was several miles away. "Are you attending the ball? I see a lot of carriages heading toward the castle. Apparently, King Caspian is seeking out a wife for his son, Prince Eric." "Hopefully," she answered, with a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "It depends on whether or not you like what I painted." She was a little embarrassed as she led him through the other side of the house where the farm animals were kept. Her stepmother had told her to move into the attic room after her return. "Well, in that case," he said, "let's see that piece, my dear." Cindy allowed Mr. Johnson to ascend the stairs first, and she followed behind him. She didn't even have time to tidy up her room. Her clothes were everywhere. Mr. Johnson had gone instantly quiet when they finally arrived upstairs. Cindy was just about to ask him if everything was all right when she noticed the painting. Blood rushed to her ears, and she thought she was hallucinating for a moment. Someone had splashed thick layers of red paint all over it, destroying the portrait of her beloved mother. The piece was ruined. She told herself that this wasn't really happening. The painting she'd been working hard on all night was now completely ruined. It seemed that someone had snuck in here while she was out and purposely destroyed it. Cindy couldn't breathe. The world around her was spinning out of control. "Oh, dear, dear. Was there an accident?" Mr. Johnson asked, staring at her, surprised. "I mean, the portrait is very good, but there are splatters of paint all over it." He must have noticed as she felt the colour drain from her face, because then he asked her to sit down on the bed and keep breathing. Cindy was losing her mind. Her skin was tingling, her chest was falling and rising in rapid movements. Tears forced their way into her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of her father's old friend. It was a disaster. He wasn't going to buy something like that from her, and now she couldn't attend that damn ball. She knew it was her stepmother's doing. "I have no idea what happened. I do apologize for wasting your time," she said, ready to murder someone in cold blood. It didn't matter that she was a lady or that she was under her stepmother's guardianship. Cindy was ready for the worst. She was furious. "It's no bother. The painting is stunning, but it's such a shame," Mr. Johnson added. "Come on, dear girl. I think you need a bit of fresh air. Your nerves are shot." Cindy rose from the bed on shaky legs, and Mr. Johnson helped her down the stairs. Her thoughts were racing, and she was asking herself why the hell she hadn't hid her painting. Anyone could have gone into her room, especially her stepsisters or stepmother. She knew that any chance she had of going to the ball was over now. She had no money to buy the dress. "Oh, there you are, Cindy. I was wondering where you'd vanished off to." Cindy heard her stepmother's voice. It looked as if her stepsisters were ready to leave. Both were wearing ballroom dresses now, fanning themselves and smiling at Mr. Johnson. Cindy's blood was boiling. She knew that she couldn't lose control in front of such a respectable man. She didn't want to lower herself to her stepmother's level. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. My name is Finn Johnson, and I'm a big enthusiast of Cindy's art. She's an excellent painter," Mr. Johnson said, reaching out and shaking Ida's hand. Cindy was clenching her fists, and she felt her knife as it was opening inside her pocket. She watched how her stepmother began speaking to Mr. Johnson. They had never been introduced. Ida knew that Cindy was a painter, but she had no idea that her stepdaughter could make money from selling art. "Ah, I would love to chat, but we need to rush off," Ida said, smiling. "I don't want my girls to be late for the ball." Cindy was so done with her theatrics. She marched up to Ida and then grabbed her elbow. "I know either you or one of your daughters destroyed my painting," she whispered, smiling at the same time, and then continued, "This is the last time you'll ruin something that belongs to me. Mark my words, stepmother, because I will not let this go. You will regret this, and the estate is going to be mine. I'm planning to fight for it." She squeezed Ida's elbow even harder, and her stepmother whimpered. She was ready to scratch Ida's eyes out, but Mr. Johnson and her stepsisters were staring. There were too many witnesses here. She noticed that her stepmother's face had instantly gone pale. The vein on the side of her neck had started throbbing, too. "Oh, it's such a shame Cindy isn't able to attend the ball. She's not feeling well." Ida narrowed her eyes toward Cindy. "She just mentioned it to me." Her tone was ice-cold. Then she bowed toward Mr. Johnson. "Come on, ladies. Our carriage is waiting." "Goodbye, dear," Mr. Johnson said. "Just let me know when you have something else, and I'll be happy to have a look at it." Then she was left alone. She watched as her stepmother and stepsisters stepped into the carriage. Mr. Johnson waved to her as the horses began to gallop away. Once everyone had departed, Cindy ran back to her room. She stared at the destroyed painting of her mother, wishing she could change her past. Tears were cascading down her face. Ida was cruel, but Cindy was certain that it was either Susan or Teresa who'd destroyed the portrait. Ida could manipulate either of them well enough. What had she ever done to deserve such cruelty? Cindy wasn't ready to marry just anyone, not truly fulfilling the clause of her father's will, simply because her stepmother wanted to ensure she wouldn't inherit the estate. And she knew Londres would have her working twice as hard and just as many hours as she did there. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. Cindy paced around for some time, wiping away her tears. She was trying to think of another way to attend the ball. She didn't want to show up looking like a vagrant. If she wanted to impress the prince, she needed to shine. Eventually she stopped pacing and peered out of the window, her chin resting on her hands. In the distance, she saw a bright, radiant light emanating from the castle, and imagined herself dancing at the ball with a handsome gentleman. She told herself that she still had time, thinking rationally about everything that had happened. Anger pulsed throughout her body as she sat on the bed. It pushed down the nausea that had settled in her stomach. The tiny voice inside her head told her that she couldn't give up just yet. Cindy wasn't about to sit in her room and sulk all night, while her stepsisters were dancing and having a good time. This kind of opportunity wouldn't present itself again. Minutes later, she rose to her feet, put away the destroyed painting of her mother, and washed her face. After everything she'd been through, she wasn't going to allow Ida to win again. Cindy pulled on her coat, tying it at the waist, and hurried downstairs, feeling a bit better. She located her invitation to the ball hidden in her stepmother's wardrobe. Another lie. Her name was on the invitation, but Ida obviously hadn't wanted her to attend. Cindy had already known as much. This was just a confirmation of her stepmother's deviousness, and the lengths she would go to in order to make Cindy's life miserable. She went to the front door and took a few deep breaths, wanting to be free again. Her heart began pounding in her chest. She was about to break her own rules. She remembered the moment when the coachman had brought news of her father's death. It was the middle of the night, and she'd just been startled awake from a horrific nightmare. When her stepmother told her about what had happened, she'd been paralyzed from head to toe. Cindy couldn't believe her father was never coming back. Several months later, she'd gotten involved with the highwayman, and that was when her life had begun to spin out of control. For several moments, she tried to pull herself together, but it wasn't easy. It had been a dark period in her life. It was her own fault that she'd allowed herself to be manipulated by a handsome man. Cindy realized if she wanted to go to the ball, she would have to ask a favor of another man. The mere thought of it pained her, but she had no other choice. Charles might not be the cleverest man on the planet, but he could help me, she told herself. Knowing Red, she went to the ball with someone else. I have to set aside my pride and just do it. Cindy wasn't certain if she and Charles had resumed their on-again, off-again relationship, but last she'd heard after her encounter with him at the market, they'd separated. Steeling her nerve, she decided to head toward his home. Lost in her thoughts, she remembered how, since her father died, Ida had told her that the forest was dangerous, filled with wild animals, but Cindy had been hunting in these parts for years. She had never feared being face-to-face with a wolf. No one ever said that achieving her goal was going to be easy. She had to make it to that ball, come what may, even if she had to wear the ugliest dress out of all the attending ladies. She was filled with anger, frustration, and sadness. She had no idea how long she'd been walking, but it was still early in the evening. It was getting colder. The temperature was dropping at an alarming rate, and she was wearing a thin coat. She wondered what he was going to say when he realized she was asking him for help, especially after the way she'd reacted toward him at the market. Cindy knew her plan wasn't ideal, but the destroyed painting had sparked a fire inside of her. She wanted to prove to her stepmother that she could and would attend the ball. About half an hour later, she found herself outside the forest ranger's home. There was a light shining through the front window, and Cindy was feeling better about the situation. She wiped her face and smoothed her coat. Cindy couldn't bear another humiliation. Charles was respected in town, and many ladies were attracted to him. If she could attend the ball with Charles, everyone would overlook the way she was dressed. However, he had several sisters, and there was a possibility that one of them had a dress that might fit her. Hoping against hope, Cindy knew that this would be an opportunity to meet the prince. She was just about to leave her hiding place and knock on his door when she saw Charles with another woman. Cindy recognized her as Red Riding Hood. Her estranged friend looked absolutely beautiful, wearing a sparkling purple dress that looked to have tiny inlaid diamonds scattered around the full length of the skirt. Charles was staring at her as if he were in love, and suddenly Cindy's chest was filled with disappointment. She wasn't disappointed for her friend, only the situation. She knew she was taking a rather large risk by coming here, but it had been a risk nonetheless. With Charles and Pamela's tumultuous relationship, she should have known. In a way, she was somewhat relieved. She would never want to hurt Red, And this entire situation went against everything she stood for. She only wanted an escort to the ball. Heaving a sigh, she crouched back down. Cindy might have had an invitation, but she knew she looked like a maid, not a future princess. There was no possible way she could go to the ball wearing her old dress. Charles was wearing a sharp, military-style jacket and brown leather pants, and he looked handsome. He and Red were stunning together. Cindy backed away behind the house when the door opened. She watched how Charles smiled at Red, helping her inside the carriage. They laughed at one another and held on to each other intimately. Moments later, the horses pulled the carriage away, leaving Cindy alone in the darkness. She was happy for Red, happy that at least her friend was going to the ball. She tossed her invitation to the ground, knowing that right now she had no choice. She needed to head home. She had no idea what she'd been thinking. She couldn't stroll into the castle looking like a servant. Hot tears streamed down her face, and bitter disappointment filled her heart. Cindy had never felt so miserable in her entire life. It seemed that her stepmother had won, and she would take over her father's estate. It was a shattering realization, and it hurt